Czernobog is the old Slavic god of death, and his name means black god, which is appropriate on first glance as he is said to embody all the bad things and the bad luck that has happened in this world. But the myths around Czernobog aren't as clear as that in reality, and so if you want to know more about him and why he is in American Gods, then keep watching. So welcome to the story of Czernobog, and welcome to Creckenfold. So what do we know about Czernobog? Well, there's a lot inferred about him in American Gods without significant evidence. So let's look at the good evidence we have that suggests that he is a god who was predominantly worshipped by cultures who lived in the eastern region of Germany, more specifically along the Elbe River. His name is a combination of two parts, Czerno, which is cognate to the Sanskrit Klizna, meaning black, and Bog, meaning god. And with the resultant name being pronounced in a number of ways, including Czernobog, and Czernobog. Now, like many European pagan gods, the first writings we have of him come from Christian sources, and the oldest of these, which specifically mentions Czernobog, is the Chronica Slavorum, which means the Chronicles of the Slavs, meaning he is considered a Slavic deity, and this manuscript was written by Helmold of Bosso in the 12th century, and is an historical account of the Slavic tribes from 800 to 1177 CE. Now, whilst there are other documents written in the late first millennium that talk about gods of this time, they are really referenced alongside commentary of the beliefs of these pagans rather than descriptions of the gods themselves. And that is because these documents are primarily denouncing the remnants of pagan worship rather than an understanding of what was being worshipped, and this means specific gods can't always be identified in these documents. Now, the tribe Helmold wrote about were called the Wends, and they were known as the Polabian Slavs, and they were considered the culture most closely associated with the worship of Czernobog. And the dates of that historical period that Helmold covered in his chronicles aren't random either. They coincide with Christianity and when it came to the region, so any reported history would also have been influenced with Christian bias, with its outlawing of pagan priesthoods, as well as the demotion of the Slavic gods into demons. Now, also when discussing Slavic mythology, we have to walk a very careful line, as whilst there are many gods that are mentioned in literature, there's often too much confidence put in the alignment of a deity due to it having a common property with a better known deity. In effect, there's a lot of weight put on theonyms and reconstruction due to the lack of writings about specific Slavic gods. And the result of this is some elaborate theories, and theories which just cannot be supported with statistical confidence. So, what makes Helmold's writing stand out, and that is that he actually mentions a number of gods by name rather than listing their powers. And with their names he lists where they are worshipped, and within this list he mentions Czernobog, and he mentions him as Malus Deus and Diabol, meaning evil god or the devil. Now, in this part of his writings he is also writes about a custom that happens at feasts and celebrations by the Wends, and that's where a bowl is passed around and to which the worshippers then denounce the name of Czernobog. And he also says they then praise a good god, and thus it gives an impression of worshipping one god in fear, any other god for love, a good god, bad god belief. Now, Helmut does not name the good god, but amongst some scholars there is an assumption that the good god would have been called Belebog, meaning white god, and a god of fate. And this too comes up in American Gods, where Czernobog talks about his brother, a good god, who would be represented by Belebog. However, there are many academics who believe that this is nothing more than a guess, as the good god is mentioned nowhere else, and so perhaps Belebog is just a hopeful grasp of what may have been. In fact, the white god's name may have been coined by the Christians themselves as a name for their god for the locals to use. But some academics believe that Helmold, rather than forget to name the good god, did so by inferring it in the next paragraph in his writings, where he mentions Vantavis, a god that was the head of the Slavic pantheon of this region at the time. However, the confidence in this god's name and the purpose is challenged, as there are no mentions of him in Slavic folk tales, which isn't something you would expect. You would expect him to have been talked about, to have stories about him. Now, in an attempt to counter this, there is a Ukrainian curse charm called May the Black God Kill You, found in Afanasiev's book of poetry, which I'll put down below because I can't pronounce that, not effectively anyway, and its chapter on light and darkness. However, many academics feel that this charm is in itself fake, leaving us with a puzzling gap over the actual identity of the good god. What we also shouldn't exclude is the possibility that Czernobog could have existed as a god but with different names, in different guises at different times. So within the Slavic traditional fairy tales, he may be present as one of the characters who is playing a demon or evil god. Now, there are also two other documents that have some credibility in the search for the truth about Czernobog. One is Pomash's Chronicon by Kramer, written at the start of the 17th century. And whilst written many centuries after the Christian conversion, it has merit, as it actually looks as though Kramer had access to some 12th century documents from a monastery near Treptow, which is in Pomerania. Now, he only refers to a black god cult as a fact of life in the 12th century without offering any tangible information about it. But at least there's a mention of it. And the other document is Kanzo's 16th century Chronic von Pommern, which makes a claim that there were human sacrifices made to Czernobog. Now, again, whilst there is no reason to believe Kanzo was deliberately misinforming those who read his work, it is a rather late attestation, and again, with no other evidence supporting this, we should consider this with caution. There is one other writing we can gain some insight from, and that we can have a level of confidence in. That is a manuscript by Thietmar of Mersburg, the place where the Mersburg charms were found, without mentioning Woden. And here Thietmar mentions a god worshipped by the Reederei of Mecklenburg in northeast Germany. And this god is named Svalozvich, and he was known as the supreme deity of the local pantheon. Now, Thietmar mentions this god as he has seen a unique temple made by skilled craftsmen, built with many animal horns and covered with images of gods and goddesses. And out of all this imagery, only one god is deemed worth mentioning. And so, from that we can infer that this is the head of the pantheon. Now, there are other documents, but they are written long after the disappearance of the worship of the gods, and have no, or just a single source of reference. That really limits their acceptance any more than what we could politely call theoretical mythology. So, in conclusion, we can say with confidence that Czernobog was a god worshipped in a relatively small area of Europe. He was not widely known during the time he was worshipped, and he was a malevolent deity, a god you feared, and so probably had sacrifices made to him out of that fear, and maybe even human sacrifices. But because there is so little known about him with certainty, we cannot say where he came from, or whether he evolved from another deity. What we can say with a reasonable degree of confidence is that his brother, the white god, didn't exist as a Slavic god, but may have been no more than an assumption based on Helmold's words, or indeed a representation of the Abrahamic god by Christians. There is certainly no persuasive evidence anyway that there was a black god, white god dualism aspect of religion happening, like found in Zoroastrianism, for example. And there is much evidence to show that these European tribes elevated one god as a supreme or unrivaled deity. And this was usually the thunder god, Perun or Perkinus, although based on the words of Helmold, for the Wend culture, it may well have been Svantavis. So why is this god in the American gods? Well, the writers infer that Czernobog is a powerful fighter, and he is Wednesday's first recruit in the war. Based on what we know, the writers have taken the information about this god, information that is less than reliable, to build up stories of these gods, to infer he has a good brother, and there's nothing wrong with that if you're writing a good but fictional story. However, it just isn't a true reflection of what we know from an academic perspective. All we really know is that Czernobog was a deity you didn't want to upset. And so I hope you're happy with this video and you found it interesting. And until the next video, please stay safe and well. And this was Creckenfold.